The morning in Seoul began like any other. The streets pulsed with the energy of the city as hurried crowds crossed the sidewalks, their steps echoing like a constant drumming. The windows of the cafes gleamed, offering warmth and comfort to those in need. It was in one of those simple, forgotten cafes on a narrow street that Kim Seong-jin, an 88-year-old man, entered. His body was bent, shoulders heavy with the weight of many years. The cold wind seemed to have left marks on his wrinkled skin, and his trembling dry hands clutched a small cloth bag he carried. Upon entering, the bell above the door rang, but no one seemed to notice the old man. The world around him appeared to have distanced itself from him long ago. Seong-jin approached the counter slowly, as if each step required effort. Behind the counter, the young attendant, Nari, was distracted, typing something on her phone, oblivious to the presence of the elderly man. He cleared his throat, trying to capture her attention. "Excuse me," he murmured, his voice so weak that it nearly got lost in the buzz around him. Nari glanced up just enough to throw a quick look in his direction, clearly uninterested. She said nothing. Seong-jin, feeling the embarrassment weigh on him, rummaged through his pockets, pulling out some crumpled bills and small coins. I would like to—" His voice faltered, and he felt the shame grow. "What can I buy with this?" The attendant looked at the money on the counter, her eyebrows furrowing slightly. She scoffed dismissively, shaking her head. "That's not enough for even a coffee, grandfather," she said, with a tone that mixed impatience and irritation. "Maybe you should go somewhere else. We don't do charity here." The air in the cafe seemed to grow even colder. Seong-jin felt his face burn with shame. He tried to take the money back, but his trembling fingers made the task difficult. Nari sighed, turning to grab a cloth and wipe down the counter, as if she were already tired of this interaction. The customers around, busy with their own conversations, let out low chuckles. He could feel the judging and indifferent gazes on him. A knot formed in Seong-jin's throat. All he wanted was a little warmth, a piece of bread. Just something to calm the hunger and cold that hadn't left his body since he could remember. He was about to turn and leave when a firm voice cut through the silence. "How much does what he asked for cost?" The entire cafe seemed to pause for a moment. Everyone's eyes turned to a woman who had stood up from one of the tables in the corner. Her steps were decisive, and her face, though calm, bore a strength that could not be ignored. It was Park Ji-yeon, a woman with piercing eyes and controlled gestures, who seemed to be in complete contrast with the environment. Nari hesitated, surprised by the interruption. But Ji-yeon did not wait for a response. She pulled a bill from her wallet and placed it on the counter with a precise motion. "This should be more than enough, right?" she asked, her eyes never leaving the attendant. Nari blinked, stunned. "Yes, of course." Her attitude quickly changed as she took the money, but the disdainful tone was still there. "Do you want me to prepare something for him?" "Yes, prepare it. Now." Ji-yeon didn't need to raise her voice. Her presence alone was authority. The attendant, without further argument, began preparing a coffee and a bread, though with visible reluctance. Ji-yeon then turned to Seong-jin, who was watching her in silence, his eyes surprised and, in a way, distrustful. "Sit with me," she said, in a softer tone. Seong-jin hesitated. He was not used to acts of kindness. It had been years since anyone had treated him with such respect. He opened his mouth to thank her, but the words wouldn't come out. He felt overwhelmed by a mix of emotions, and all he could manage was a small nod. They sat at a table by the window. The silence between them was thick, but not uncomfortable. As they waited for the meal, Ji-yeon gazed out the window, as if watching something very distant, something beyond what the eyes could see. Seong-jin, in turn, looked at his hands, embarrassed, trying to understand why this woman had intervened. When the coffee and bread arrived, Seong-jin tried once more to express his gratitude, but Ji-yeon interrupted him with a simple gesture. "You don't need to say anything," she said. "Just eat." Seong-jin picked up the bread with trembling fingers and took a small bite. The warmth of the coffee in his hands brought an almost forgotten sense of comfort. He closed his eyes for a moment, savoring the simplicity of that gesture. Ji-yeon continued observing the street, but her thoughts were far away, connected to something she couldn't even explain. She had gotten up at that moment because something in Seong-jin's gaze had touched her deeply, a silent pain she knew all too well. And unknowingly, that sudden decision to intervene would mark the beginning of a journey that would change both of their lives. "What is your name?" Ji-yeon asked, breaking the silence. Seong-jin swallowed the coffee before answering, his voice still hesitant. "Kim Seong-jin." She nodded slowly, storing the name in her mind, as if it were something precious. "Seong-jin," she repeated, with a softness that contrasted with the harshness of the world outside. He looked at her, feeling that somehow their lives had intertwined at that moment. Something far greater than he could understand was happening there. The coffee still emitted steam in the cold air of the cafe, but the silence between Ji-yeon and Seong-jin was thick, laden with unspoken meanings. The woman, with a serious expression, finally diverted her gaze from the window and fixed it on the old man, studying his face, marked by time and pain. There was something in his posture, in his eyes, that made her wonder how many untold stories were buried beneath those wrinkles. "Kim Seong-jin," she repeated, as if savoring the name. "Do you live around here?" Seong-jin hesitated for a moment. He wasn't used to interactions like this. In recent years, life had become a sequence of invisibility and loneliness. Days passed like fog, and he had learned to survive on the periphery of society, where people rarely noticed his presence. Finally, he responded in a low voice, almost apologizing for speaking. "Not far away. I live in a small room. It's nothing, but it's where I spend my days." Ji-yeon nodded, her expression not changing. She could sense the discomfort in his words, but beyond that, she felt that the man in front of her carried a weight greater than just poverty or loneliness. There was something in his words, something Ji-yeon recognized. She herself wasn't far from that same emptiness. "And you?" Seong-jin asked suddenly, surprising himself by speaking. "It seems like you're not from around here either. Your expression, it's not that of someone who lives peacefully." Ji-yeon raised her eyebrows, a small smile forming at the corner of her lips. That question, coming from someone she had just met, caught her off guard. For a moment, she wondered what could have led the old man to see that in her, as if, somehow, her pains were transparent. "I think peace is something I left behind a long time ago," she replied, evasive but sincere. "But I suppose that doesn't matter now. What matters is that for some reason we're here, sitting together, today. Xiangjin looked at her, not quite sure how to respond. He wasn't in the habit of reflecting on fate or coincidence, but something about this situation made him realize that perhaps there was more to this woman than he initially thought. She seemed to carry an invisible burden, something that connected her to him, even though she didn't know how. "Why did you help me?" he asked, finally putting into words what he had been mulling over since she paid for his meal. Ji-yeon sighed lightly before answering. It was a fair question, but the answer wasn't simple. She hadn't thought much before acting. Something inside her had moved her. Perhaps it was the way Xiangjin was hunched over in shame in the face of the world's coldness. Or perhaps it was something deeper, an unconscious identification with his pain. "I'm not quite sure," she began, choosing her words carefully. "Maybe it was the fact that no one else seemed to care. And I guess I saw a bit of myself in you. We're all looking for something, aren't we?" Xiangjin frowned, trying to understand what she meant. He didn't see himself searching for anything more in life. For him, the search had ended many years ago, and all that remained was a silent existence, an attempt to pass unnoticed until the inevitable end. But Ji-yeon spoke as if there was still something to be found. "And what are you looking for?" he asked, more out of curiosity than anything else. Ji-yeon fell silent for a moment, her eyes darkening as she looked at the coffee in her cup. The question struck her in an unexpected way because she herself didn't know the answer. Her life had been a sequence of difficult decisions, losses, and sacrifices. Perhaps that was why, in that moment, looking at Xiangjin, she felt a strange connection. "Peace, perhaps," she finally replied. "Something that makes me feel that all the choices I've made so far were worth it. But that seems to be getting further and further away." Xiangjin nodded slowly. He didn't know the details of Ji-yeon's life, but he felt that, in a way, they shared the same sense of exhaustion. There was an exhaustion in his eyes, the same one he saw in the mirror every morning. Before they could continue the conversation, the cafeteria door opened with a shrill sound, and two men entered. They were casually dressed, but there was something dangerous about their presence. They moved directly toward Ji-yeon without hesitation, as if they knew exactly where to find her. "Park Ji-yeon," one of them asked, his voice sharp. He didn't wait for an answer. "We need to talk." Xiangjin immediately felt the air change. Ji-yeon straightened in her chair, her eyes fixed on the men. There was no fear in her expression, but a tense calm, as if she were ready for anything. "Not now," she replied, her voice firm but low. "We don't have a choice," insisted the man, a slight smile on his face. "We know about what happened. There's no point in trying to escape. Are we going to do this the easy way or the hard way?" The old Songjin watched the scene, not understanding what was happening, but he could feel the tension. Ji-yeon, the woman who had just helped him, was now involved in something dark, something he couldn't decipher. He could see in her eyes that this wasn't the first time she had faced a situation like this. Ji-yeon slowly stood up, her body rigid with determination. "Let's talk outside," she said, glancing at Xiangjin briefly, as if apologizing for interrupting the moment they had shared. The men nodded, moving toward the door with Ji-yeon right behind them. But before leaving, she turned to Xiangjin one last time. "Take care, Xiangjin. We will see each other again." With that, she disappeared into the street, leaving the old man alone, his mind confused by the speed of events. Xiangjin sat in silence, the coffee still hot in front of him. He knew somehow that this woman and her fate were now intertwined with his. What he didn't know was how much his life would change from that moment on. Xiangjin remained seated for a few minutes after Ji-yeon's abrupt exit. The coffee cooled before him, but his mind was far from that place. The last exchange of glances with Ji-yeon had disturbed him more than he would like to admit. There was something in her eyes, a mix of sadness and resignation, that connected him to something deep within himself. He didn't know if it was empathy or just a feeling of déjà vu, but he felt strangely responsible for that woman he had just met. The old man sighed, finishing the cold coffee in one gulp. He had nowhere else to go, and the thought of returning to his tiny, empty room filled him with a familiar sense of emptiness. Determined to clear his head, he left the cafe, hands shoved in his pockets, and began walking through the narrow, dimly lit streets of the neighborhood. The sky was overcast, reflecting his gloomy mood. As he walked, Xiangjin thought about Ji-yeon's words. "We are all looking for something." He wondered if that was true for him as well. Was he still looking for something? After so many years living a monotonous, lonely life, it was hard to believe there was still something worth fighting for. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of tires screeching as they turned the corner. A black car suddenly appeared, its headlights illuminating Xiangjin's face. The car stopped abruptly a few meters away from him, and two figures emerged, moving quickly in his direction. "Kim Xiangjin," one of them called, his voice deep and emotionless. Xiangjin froze. His heart raced, and his old instincts, those he thought he had buried, came rushing back. He looked around, searching for an escape route, but he knew he wouldn't have a chance to get away. The men now walking toward him were not amateurs. Who are you?" he asked, his voice trembling, but with a firmness he hadn't expected. "That doesn't matter right now," the man in front replied. He was tall, with a firm posture, and an impassive expression. "We need you to come with us. We have some questions about Ji-yeon." The name Ji-yeon sent a shiver down Xiangjin's spine. He had known something was wrong with those men the moment he saw them. But now, mentioning Ji-yeon, everything seemed to fit together uncomfortably. They were after her, and now somehow he was involved too. I don't know anything. I just met her," he tried to argue. But the man's gaze made it clear that it didn't matter. "That's not our problem, Mr. Kim. All we know is that you were with her today. Now come." Before Xiangjin could react, he felt a firm hand on his shoulder, pushing him toward the car. His body, frail with age, had no way to resist. Even if he wanted to fight, he knew it would be futile. In the back seat of the car, Xiangjin felt like a prisoner, unable to process what was happening. The car sped through the narrow streets of Seoul, taking him to a place he didn't recognize. The silence inside the vehicle was oppressive, each second stretching as if time were deliberately dragging on. Finally, the car stopped in front of a discreet building, far from the bustling city center. The men escorted him inside, where he was led to a small room, illuminated by a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling. The atmosphere felt like something out of a spy movie, and Xiangjin's heart raced in his chest, anxiety growing with each passing second. "Sit down," one of the men ordered, pointing to a metal chair in the center of the room. Seongjin obeyed, his body tense. He hadn't been in a situation like this for a long time, but he still remembered the feelings. The room, the silence, the cold stares. Something about all of it felt overly familiar, as if he were reliving an old nightmare. The man who seemed to be the leader of the group entered shortly after and sat down across from him, crossing his arms. "Let's get straight to the point, Mr. Kim," he began, without preamble. "We know Ji-yeon is involved in something big. We don't know all the details yet, but we need information. And you were the last to see her before she disappeared, so anything you tell us could be useful." "I've already said," Seongjin started, feeling the urgency rise in his voice. "I barely know her. We met by chance today. She paid for my meal, and we talked a little. That was it." The man frowned, clearly dissatisfied with the answer. He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping but becoming more threatening. "Come on, Mr. Kim, don't make me waste my time. You want me to believe that a woman like Ji-yeon simply decided to pay for your meal and walk away? Doesn't that seem like a strange coincidence?" Seongjin swallowed hard. It was true that there was something odd about the whole situation, but he didn't know more than that. His silence seemed to irritate the man even further. "She's on the run, Mr. Kim," the interrogator continued, his eyes locked onto Seongjin's. "Running from something much bigger than the two of us. And if you get in the way, you'll be dragged to the same fate. Do you understand what I'm saying?" Seongjin felt a chill run down his spine. What had Ji-yeon done? And how was he, a lonely and insignificant man, now involved in something so dangerous? His chest tightened with the anguish of being trapped in a situation he didn't understand. "I don't know anything," he repeated desperately, trying to find a way out of this suffocating situation. The man sighed, slowly standing up. "We'll see if you're telling the truth, Mr. Kim. We have ways of finding out." With that, he left the room, leaving Seongjin alone, enveloped in a growing darkness of fear and uncertainty. The room fell into a deafening silence after the man's departure, and Seongjin felt the air seem even heavier. His hands trembled slightly as he tried to organize his thoughts. It was surreal. Suddenly, he was being dragged into a dangerous game, and he couldn't understand how Ji-yeon was involved. Was she really on the run? But from what? And why had he been involved? Time seemed to crawl as he waited. Each passing second fueled his anxiety and fear. What would they do to him? He had no answers, but he knew these people were willing to use unfriendly methods to obtain information. The image of Ji-yeon floated in his mind, her eyes, her calculated movements. Something about her was deeply unsettling, yet at the same time, alluring. A few minutes later, the door to the room opened again, this time without fanfare. A woman entered. Unlike the brutish men who had brought him here, she had a serene posture, with firm and graceful steps. Dressed professionally, but with an aura of authority that made it clear she was more dangerous than she seemed. "Seongjin," she began straightforwardly, sitting in the chair across from him. Her voice was soft, but carried a tone that demanded attention. "My name is Soo-jin, and I'm here to ask you some questions. I hope you will cooperate, as we do not want to prolong this situation any longer than necessary." He stared at her, trying to remain calm, but his chest felt tight with fear and confusion. I don't know how I can help," he replied honestly, unable to hide the tension in his voice. She crossed her legs, a light and cold smile touching her lips. "I know this may seem frightening, but it doesn't have to be," she said, maintaining her professional tone. "We just want information about Ji-yeon. We know you met today. We know she trusts you in some way. And that makes us believe you have something to tell us." "Do you trust me?" Seong-jin repeated, incredulous. "She hardly knows me. We just talked. It was a coincidence, nothing more." Soo-jin maintained her smile, but her eyes were full of skepticism. "I don't believe in coincidences," she stated. "And you shouldn't believe in them either, Seong-jin, especially when they involve people like Ji-yeon." Her name seemed to resonate in the room like a veiled threat. Seong-jin knew he was on unstable ground, and any wrong word could put him in even greater danger. "I swear, all I know is what I've already told you," he insisted, feeling increasingly cornered. "She paid for my meal. We talked about life. Nothing more." Soo-jin was watching him intently, evaluating every word, every movement. She slowly got up, walking around the chair where he was sitting, like a predator circling its prey. "Seong-jin, you have a long history, don't you?" she began, suddenly changing the course of the conversation. "An interesting past. I was informed that you had a career in the army. Special operations, right?" Seong-jin flinched at the mention of his past. He had spent years trying to bury that part of his life, and hearing it now unsettled him deeply. "That was a long time ago," he murmured, his voice raspy. "Exactly," Soo-jin agreed, leaning toward him. "A long time ago. But see, the things we do in the past have a way of catching up with us in the present. And Ji-yeon, well, she is connected to that past of yours in a way you may not have realized yet." Seong-jin fell silent, processing those words. How could she be connected to his past? He hardly knew her. But at the same time, there was something in the way Soo-jin spoke, something that stirred old memories, memories he preferred to have forgotten. "What do you mean by that?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. Soo-jin stopped circling around him and faced him again, looking into his eyes with intensity. "Ji-yeon has secrets, Mr. Kim, secrets that, if revealed, could shake many powerful structures. And what you don't understand yet, but will soon realize, is that you are more involved in this than you think. Maybe she chose you for a reason." Seong-jin shook his head, confused. "Chosen? Why? I'm just an old, tired man. I'm not involved in any of this. Don't be so modest." Soo-jin smiled, but there was a cutting coldness there. "Your past is more relevant than you imagine. Maybe that's what Ji-yeon saw in you. She knows who she is dealing with. And now, so do we." Seong-jin felt wrapped in a whirlwind of thoughts. As much as he wanted to pull away, he felt trapped in a web of conspiracies and secrets. And with each new word he heard, he felt more ensnared. "What do you want from me, after all?" he asked, exasperated. Soo-jin leaned in closer, whispering, "We want you to help us find Ji-yeon before she causes more damage. And if you don't, well, the consequences could be disastrous for all of us, including you." The threat hung in the air, heavy and oppressive. Seong-jin knew he was at a crossroads. Whatever the truth about Ji-yeon, he couldn't ignore the fact that he was in grave danger. But helping these people? Turning over Ji-yeon without knowing exactly what she was involved in? The only thing he knew was that from that moment on, nothing would be as it was before. "So, Mr. Kim, Sujin asked softly, as if requesting a small favor. "Will you cooperate, or will we need to force your hand?" Seongjin closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of her words. He needed to think. He needed time. But he knew that time was exactly what he didn't have. When he opened his eyes, Sujin was patiently waiting for his answer. Seongjin found himself in a suffocating position, where every choice seemed to be a step toward a precipice. On the other side of the table, Sujin continued to stare at him, with that look that mixed calm and threat. He knew she wasn't bluffing. If he refused to cooperate, he would be crushed. If he accepted, he would have to betray Ji-yeon, a woman shrouded in mystery, but who somehow had trusted him. And above all, what did they expect from a man whose past he himself was trying to forget? "I'm waiting, Mr. Kim," Sujin repeated, her voice controlled, but with a hint of impatience beginning to show. Seongjin took a deep breath. His thoughts were a storm of contradictions. He needed to buy time, to understand more of what was happening. Deciding blindly could cost him his life. "I need more information," he said, trying to sound firm. "How can I help if I don't know what's really going on? What exactly are you looking for in Ji-yeon?" Sujin watched him with sharp eyes, clearly assessing his response. She knew he was trying to maneuver the situation, but for now, she seemed willing to play along. "Ji-yeon is an important piece in a game that involves much more than you can imagine," Sujin said, leaning forward as if she was about to reveal something significant. "She possesses sensitive information that could expose powerful people. We're talking about a network of corruption that extends to levels you would never believe." Seongjin narrowed his eyes, trying to absorb all of this. "Corruption?" he repeated, as if it were hard to believe. "And why is she in the middle of this? She doesn't seem the type." Sujin interrupted him with a low, humorless laugh. "Don't be fooled by appearances, Mr. Kim. Ji-yeon is smart. She knows exactly what she's getting into. She is not a victim. She is a player. And if we don't find her before others do, this game could end very badly for all of us." "Others?" Seongjin questioned, a chill running down his spine. "Who else is after her?" Sujin sighed, as if the conversation was beginning to tire her. "Don't think we are the only ones interested," she said, her voice a bit harsher. "There are other groups that want her for the same reasons, and they are not as patient as we are. If those others find her first, Ji-yeon could disappear, along with the information she carries. And believe me, Mr. Kim, you wouldn't come out unscathed either." Seongjin felt the weight of those words. What could Ji-yeon know that was so important? And more disturbingly, why had he been placed in the middle of this conflict? He thought of everything he knew so far, but the pieces still didn't fit together. It was a puzzle with too many gaps, and he couldn't see the whole picture. "If she's in so much danger," he began cautiously, "why should I trust you? What will you do with her if you find her?" Sujin stared at him for a moment before standing up. She walked to the window, crossing her arms, looking out at the city view. "We don't intend to hurt her, Seongjin," she said, not looking at him. "We just want the information. After that, her fate, well, it depends on what she's willing to do." Her words were calculated, as always. Sujin was a hard woman to read, but Seongjin knew that behind her calm exterior, there was a storm. He just didn't know if she was being sincere, or if this was another maneuver to gain his trust. "You need to decide, and fast," Sujin said, still with her back to him. "We will find Ji-yeon with or without your help, but if you cooperate, you might have a chance of getting out of this unscathed. And who knows, maybe she will too." Seongjin fell silent. The dilemma that tormented him didn't have an easy answer. He could hand over Ji-yeon and ensure his own safety, but he would be condemning her. Or he could try to protect her without even knowing if she was worthy of that protection. After all, she was a stranger to him, shrouded in secrets and intrigues. Soo-jin turned back to him again, her hands in her coat pockets. She was serious now, without the trace of a smile that had floated on her lips before. "Time is a luxury you don't have, Seongjin," she said, with a direct coldness. "Either you help us, or you'll be on the wrong side when all of this blows up." Those words echoed in Seongjin's mind. The wrong side. He knew what it meant to be on the wrong side of a war. He had experienced it in the past, and the scars he carried were still painful. But this time, the stakes seemed even higher. Soo-jin took a step forward, her presence imposing. "We have eyes everywhere, Seongjin. Don't deceive yourself into thinking you can walk out of here and disappear. Wherever you go, we will be there. And if you don't cooperate, we won't hesitate to use more direct methods." She didn't need to elaborate on what those methods could be. He knew. He had seen up close what true violence was capable of. Seongjin took a deep breath. Every part of his body screamed for a solution, but he was trapped. He couldn't trust anyone, much less these strangers surrounding him with veiled threats and empty promises. But he also knew that refusing Soo-jin's offer could cost him everything. "Give me a little time," he said, almost pleading. "I need to think." Soo-jin watched him in silence for a moment before slowly nodding. "You have 24 hours, she said finally. "After that, we will wait for your answer. Don't fail us, Seongjin. Don't fail yourself." With those words, she gestured, and the men who had brought Seongjin to the room approached, ready to escort him out. As they led him down the hallway, his heart raced. He knew that the 24-hour deadline was not an opportunity. It was a death sentence postponed. With every step, he felt the weight of his decision closing in. What would he do now? And more importantly, what did Ji-yeon know that could turn his world upside down? The truth was out there, waiting, and Seongjin's time was running out. As he was released onto the dark, damp sidewalk, Seongjin felt the crushing weight of the situation. The 24 hours echoed like a sentence in the back of his mind. The night air was thick with humidity, which only increased the pressure on him. He was in the heart of the city, yet he felt completely isolated. There was no one to turn to. Soo-jin had been clear. They were watching him. Their shadow loomed over him. Even there, amidst the distant noise of traffic and the bright lights of towering buildings. He walked toward the subway, trying not to look suspicious, but feeling increasingly vulnerable. The city he knew like the back of his hand suddenly felt strange. Every corner, every reflection in the shop window mirrors seemed to be watching him, waiting for him to make a mistake. Seongjin knew he couldn't run to Ji-yeon. It was too risky. She wouldn't know him well enough to trust him, and the chances that she was on the run were not small. He needed to find out more about her, understand what was at stake before making any decisions. But where to start? He took out his phone and dialed Haiwan's number, his old friend, who always seemed to know more than he should about the underworld's back rooms. If anyone could provide him with information without raising suspicions, it would be him. Hey, Juan, Xiong said, his voice a bit more nervous than he intended. Xiong, long time no see. Haiwan's cheerful voice on the other end seemed oblivious to the tension Xiong carried. What can I do for you? Need a drink? Maybe later, Xiong said, trying to keep the conversation casual. But first, I need your help with something. There was a pause on the other end. This sounds serious, Haiwan said, now with a hint of caution in his voice. What's going on? Let's just say I'm in the middle of something complicated. Xiong looked around, even knowing it was pointless. He couldn't take any risks. I need information about a woman named Jiyan. Can you find out anything for me? Haiwan laughed, but this time there was a noticeable tension. You always get yourself into situations like this, don't you, Xiong? I'll see what I can do, but it's going to take some time. Who is this woman? Did you get involved with the wrong people? I just need anything you can find, Xiong said, ignoring the question. And quickly, I'm short on time. All right. I'll call you as soon as I know anything. Hanging up the phone, Xiong felt the weight of silence press down on him again. He was at the mercy of forces he didn't understand. Sujin had been clear, and her threat still lingered in his mind like a heavy cloud. He was being watched, followed. He knew that. But who were these others who were also after Jiyan? There were more players on this board, and he had no idea who they were or what their intentions were. He took the subway back to his small apartment. Upon entering the familiar place, he felt a brief sense of relief. It was his space, his refuge. But for how long? Time was running out, and he needed to act fast. He decided not to turn on the lights, sitting on the couch in the dark, immersed in thought. What exactly did Jiyan have that made her so valuable? And why were Sujin and her group willing to trample over anyone to get to her? He ran his hands through his hair, trying to organize the whirlwind of thoughts flooding his mind. Memories of past encounters with Sujin surfaced in his mind. He knew she was relentless, but this time something felt different. There was an urgency he had never seen before. Sujin had always been controlled, almost cold, in her actions. Now, it seemed like she was racing against time, just like him. His phone rang, pulling him out of his thoughts. It was Haiwan. Xiong, I've got some information. Haiwan's voice sounded more serious than usual. It's not much, but it might help. This Jiyan you're looking for, she's connected to a group called Escape Point. Have you heard of it? Xiong furrowed his brow. Escape Point? No. What is that? It's a small but well-organized group. They deal with sensitive information. Basically, they're experts in making data, and sometimes people disappear. It seems Jiyan has been on their radar for some time, and that's not a good sign. People like that won't stop until they get what they want. Xiong felt a chill run down his spine. And they're after her? He asked, his voice a bit tenser. It seems so, Haiwan replied. And there are rumors that other groups are interested as well. But here's the interesting part. She's not just running away. There are signs that she's pulling the strings herself, Xiong. This woman is not a victim. Do you understand what I'm saying? Xiong felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. Everything he thought he knew was beginning to unravel. Jiyan wasn't just someone being hunted. She was an active player, and that changed everything. Questions began to multiply in his mind. What was she planning? What was behind this frantic hunt? Do you know where she is? Xiong asked, his voice now filled with urgency. "It's complicated," Haewon replied. "She's been very good at covering her tracks. But if I were you, I'd start at a place called Black Orchid. It's a bar in a more remote part of the city. They say she's been spotted there." "Black Orchid," Seongjin repeated, feeling that he had found his next lead. "Thank you, Haewon. This is more than I expected. Just be careful, Seongjin. If you're caught up in this, there may be no turning back. These people you're dealing with are the kind that don't leave loose ends." The call ended, and Seongjin remained silent. The Black Orchid was his only lead. He had no choice. Time was running out, and he needed to find Ji-yeon before the world around him completely collapsed. As he grabbed his jacket and walked toward the door, he knew he was entering dangerous territory. There were no guarantees he would come out unscathed. But one thing was certain: he needed answers, and Ji-yeon was the key to everything. With a heavy heart and racing thoughts, Seongjin headed into the unknown, knowing that each step took him deeper into a web of lies, secrets, and betrayals. The Black Orchid Bar was located on one of the darker sides of the city, away from the bright lights and hustle of downtown. Seongjin didn't know what to expect, but the name alone evoked a sense of mystery and intrigue. The place was not just a bar. It was a portal to the city's darkest secrets. He reached the entrance, which was slightly ajar, revealing a faint amber glow spilling out. As he pushed the door open, the sound of soft music and muffled conversations flooded his ears, creating an intimate yet unsettling atmosphere. The walls were covered in dark wood paneling, and shadows danced in the soft light of hanging lamps. The interior was crowded, but it didn't seem on the verge of collapse. People whispered to one another, as if sharing secrets that were never meant to be heard. Seongjin felt the weight of their gazes upon him as he entered, but he took a deep breath, trying not to show his nervousness. He wasn't there to be noticed. He was there to find Ji-yeon. At first, he walked over to the bar, where a hard-faced bartender greeted him with a nod. The smell of distilled drinks and cigarette smoke filled the air. Seongjin ordered a strong drink to calm his nerves and, while waiting, looked around, trying to spot any clue that could lead him to Ji-yeon. He spotted a group in a corner, all casually dressed but exuding a sense of confidence. They looked at him with considerable interest, and Seongjin realized they were not just patrons. There was something in their gazes that suggested they were part of this underground world. He didn't know whether to approach or not, but the instinct for survival began to guide him. When the bartender brought his drink, Seongjin decided he needed to take the risk. He approached the group and started a light conversation, asking about the bar's atmosphere. They seemed suspicious at first, but soon realized he was not a threat. He threw out some more subtle questions, trying to fish for information about Ji-yeon, but the group appeared reluctant to share any details. "I've heard that you can find what you're looking for here," said one of the men, looking directly into his eyes. "But it comes at a price." "Dia, price?" Seongjin asked, trying to sound nonchalant. "What kind of price?" "Information, my friend. You know how it works here. Want to know about a girl named Ji-yeon? You'll have to share something in return." Seongjin hesitated. He wasn't ready to expose his own secrets, but he knew he had no choice. He needed that information, and the risks of not acting were even greater. "I'm willing to help," he said, straightening up. What do you need to know? The man smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. What do you know about the living shadows? Seong-jin felt a chill run down his spine. The name resonated in his mind like an echo of something much deeper and more dangerous than he had imagined. The living shadows were known for their criminal activities, involved in smuggling and extortion. Apparently, they had a great interest in Ji-yeon. What did she have to do with them? What made her so valuable? Not much, Seong-jin said, trying to sound calmer than he felt. I just heard rumors. Are they after something? The man in the group gestured as if he were amused. You're new in town, aren't you? These people are dangerous. If Ji-yeon is really involved with them, you need to stay away. Seong-jin couldn't believe the turn the conversation was taking. The mention of the living shadows only deepened the mystery. Why is she being hunted? Seong-jin pressed, trying to get more information. The man hesitated, his eyes assessing the situation. If you want to know, you should go straight to the source, but be prepared. The truth may be more complicated than you think. Seong-jin felt he had to get straight to the point. Where can I find her? Do you know where she is? The man leaned forward, his eyes fixed on Seong-jin's. There's a possibility. She's often seen at an abandoned warehouse near the train tracks. But don't make me promise she'll still be there when you arrive. The situation is changing fast, and the last thing you want is to get caught in the middle of it. Seong-jin thanked the man and made his way back to the door. As he stepped out of the bar, the cold night air hit him like a bucket of ice water. He had a lead, a chance to find Ji-yeon, but he knew time was running out. Hae-won's information and the group at the bar were connected, and he needed to act quickly. He felt a wave of adrenaline rush through him as he headed toward the warehouse, each step pulling him deeper into a dangerous game. What he would find there could change everything. The truth about Ji-yeon, about the living shadows, and even about his own life could be revealed in an instant. There was no turning back now. With every second, the tension mounted, as if the city around him were breathing with him, waiting for what was to come. Seong-jin moved quickly through the darkness of the city, the distant sound of trains serving as a constant reminder of what awaited him. The warehouse the group had mentioned was on the outskirts of town, away from prying eyes. The abandoned industrial area was a maze of structures corroded by time, a place where secrets were buried and stories ended without witnesses. As he approached the site, he felt the weight of the environment. The building appeared to be in ruins, its walls peeling and rusted with age. The windows were huge black holes, spying on the soul of anyone who dared to come close. There was something inherently wrong about that place, as if it were imbued with despair and violence. Seong-jin stopped at a distance, assessing the warehouse. Shadows danced with the dim light of abandoned street lamps, creating an almost surreal scene. He knew he couldn't just walk in. He needed a plan. He decided to go around the structure, searching for a less obvious entrance. His steps were careful, avoiding any sound that might alert someone inside. When he finally found a side entrance, a semi-open metal door, he heard muffled voices coming from within. There were more people than he expected. Adrenaline coursed through his veins. He knew he was entering dangerous territory, but there was no turning back now. He slipped through the door, his eyes adjusting to the dimness. The interior of the warehouse was vast, divided into different levels, with stacks of old boxes and abandoned machinery all around. Xiong moved cautiously, staying in the shadows as he approached the voices. The conversation became clearer as he advanced, and his heart raced when he recognized one of them. It was Ji-yeon. She was alive, but something in her voice seemed off. Tense, he crept closer, peering between the stacks of boxes. Ji-yeon was surrounded by 3 men, all dressed in black. One of them appeared to be in charge, standing while the other 2 guarded the doors. The leader spoke in a calm but threatening tone. "You're playing with fire, Ji-yeon," he said, his voice cold as steel. "Did you think you could fool us for so long? We know exactly what you're trying to do, and we won't allow it." Ji-yeon, her face pale and marked by fatigue, responded with surprising firmness. "I never said it would be easy for you. I'm not just another pawn in your game." Xiong could feel the tension in the air, like a string stretched to the breaking point. He needed to intervene, but the situation was complicated. He still didn't know who these men were exactly, but from the way they spoke, they were clearly connected to the living shadows. Maybe they were more than just associates. Maybe they were the core itself. Suddenly, one of the men grabbed Ji-yeon by the arm, pulling her sharply forward. "This ends here, Ji-yeon," he growled. "You're going to tell us where the formula is. Now!" Xiong felt a shock run down his spine. Formula? What was happening? This was beyond what he had imagined. Apparently, Ji-yeon was at the center of a much larger intrigue, involving something valuable, something these men would do anything to obtain. Without thinking too much, Xiong knew his window of action was closing. He pulled out the knife he always carried with him, a small talisman from his previous life on the streets, and prepared to move forward. But before he could take the first step, Ji-yeon, with an agility he did not expect, twisted her arm and delivered a precise strike to the man holding her. The man screamed in pain, stumbling back as Ji-yeon freed herself. "Run!" she shouted to Xiong, her voice echoing in the warehouse. But contrary to her order, Xiong ran toward her, blocking the path of one of the thugs who was already drawing a weapon. He disarmed him with a speed that surprised everyone. The fight spread throughout the environment in seconds. The men, although trained, underestimated Xiong. He fought with cold precision, his movements quick and calculated, focused only on one thing, getting Ji-yeon out of there. But deep down, he knew this battle was not the end. It was only the beginning of something much larger. When the last thug fell, Xiong grabbed Ji-yeon by the arm. "We have to get out now," he said, his voice firm. She looked at him, her eyes filled with a mix of relief and despair. "You shouldn't have come," she murmured. "I had no choice," he replied, pulling her toward the exit. The 2 ran out of the warehouse, the sound of sirens in the distance beginning to approach. They barely had time to breathe as they fled through the deserted streets, knowing that the next phase of this story was already in motion. And Xiong knew, without a doubt, that the truth behind Ji-yeon and the formula would be far more devastating than he had ever imagined. Xiong and Ji-yeon ran through the deserted streets, their heavy breaths mixing with the distant sound of approaching sirens. Adrenaline pulsed through their veins, and the world around them seemed a blur of shadows and lights. They didn't stop until they found themselves in a narrow alley. far from the warehouse and immediate danger. "What was that?" Seong-jin asked, trying to catch his breath as he leaned against the cold wall. "What did those men want from you?" Ji-yeon hesitated, her eyes glimmering under the moonlight. The intensity of her past experiences reflected in her gaze, as if a hidden nightmare had resurfaced. They want the formula I created, Seong-jin. It's a combination of compounds that can be used to create a new generation of medications. A discovery that can save lives or control them. The impact of Ji-yeon's words hit Seong-jin like a punch to the stomach. He had imagined her past was complicated, but the gravity of the situation caught him off guard. The formula was a powerful weapon, and if it fell into the wrong hands, it could lead to devastating consequences. "But how did you get involved with them?" he asked, trying to understand how all of this fit together. "And who are they, really?" She looked down at the ground, the internal struggle evident on her face. "I didn't know what they were doing when I joined the project. At first, I thought I was contributing to something good. But over time, I realized the company was getting involved in shady activities, experimenting with the research results. When I tried to leave, they threatened me." The memory hit her hard, and a wave of emotion enveloped her. "I had no idea the formula would become so valuable. Now, those men are willing to do anything to find me, and you put yourself in danger because of me." Seong-jin felt a wave of protectiveness wash over him. "Don't worry about that now. We need to come up with a plan. We need to find a safe place for you." She nodded, but her gaze was distant, as if the weight of her actions was suffocating her. "We can't stay here. They will find me. You don't know how far they will go to get what they want." "So, what do you suggest?" Seong-jin asked, determined not to let the situation deteriorate further. Ji-yeon looked at him, her eyes shining with a new determination. "I know a place, an old lab I used for my research. It's hidden, and if we're quick, we can manage to protect ourselves there, but I can't guarantee we'll be safe for long." Seong-jin nodded, ready to follow her lead. "Let's go. The faster we move, the better." They moved cautiously, avoiding busy streets and using alleys to hide. The silence was oppressive, and the tension in the air was palpable. The city, which once felt like a familiar home, was now a hostile labyrinth. When they finally arrived at the lab, Seong-jin was impressed by the structure. It was an old facility, filled with dusty equipment and work tables covered in yellowed papers. The environment exuded a smell of chemicals in the past, a testament to what had once been a center of innovation. Ji-yeon quickly began to work, opening cabinets and rummaging through drawers. "Here," she exclaimed, holding up a USB drive. "It contains all the information on the formula and the experiments. If I can send this to someone trustworthy, we can expose what's happening." Seong-jin realized that time was running out. They were safe for now, but the threat from the warehouse men still lingered in the air. "Do you have someone you trust?" "Yes, an old college friend, Junho. He still works in the field and can help spread the research." She began typing quickly on an old computer while Seong-jin watched her anxiously. "I hope it works." "We don't have much time," he replied, looking out the window for any sign of suspicious movement. Seconds dragged on, and the tension mounted as Ji-yeon typed. Finally, she smiled, relieved. "Done. I sent the message to Junho. Now we just have to wait." However, the hope was brief. The sound of heavy footsteps approaching cut through the silence like a knife. Xiangjin looked at Ji Yan, and her expression turned to panic. "They're here," she whispered, her voice trembling. Xiangjin quickly positioned himself in front of her, ready to protect the only person that mattered now. But what they didn't know was that this moment would be the turning point, not just for their lives, but for the battle unfolding in the shadows of the city. As the threatening shadows drew closer, Xiangjin took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. What happened next would determine their fate, and he was determined to fight. "We'll face this together," he murmured, his eyes fixed on the door. The only thing he knew was that he couldn't let the past decide the future. The battle was just beginning, and the echo of their choices would reverberate in their destinies, changing everything forever. The lab door trembled as a loud impact resonated, causing both of them to turn in unison. Xiangjin's heart raced, each beat echoing like a war drum. He knew they couldn't wait passively. The only way out was to fight, and his determination to protect Ji Yan became his fuel. "Quick, to the back door!" Xiangjin shouted, pulling Ji Yan by the hand. They ran to the back of the lab, where a rusty metal door opened to a staircase leading to a basement. They hurried down the steps, the sound of voices and footsteps growing louder with each second. Ji Yan was panting, and the tension on her face was palpable. "I don't know what we're going to do, Xiangjin. There are too many of them, and they have more experience. What if—" She hesitated, but he interrupted her. "We can't give up now. We have to use what we have, and we have the element of surprise. Let's stick together and find a way to escape." Upon reaching the basement, Xiangjin quickly assessed the space. It was a maze of machines and test tubes, with storage boxes piled in a corner. The place exuded an atmosphere of abandonment, but also of potential. "There has to be something we can use," Ji Yan murmured, looking around. Xiangjin began rummaging through the boxes while Ji Yan searched for any equipment that could serve as an improvised weapon. Amidst the vials and tubes, Xiangjin found a small toolbox. "This could help," he said, holding the box as if it were treasure. Meanwhile, Ji Yan had found a roll of duct tape and a bottle of a colored liquid. "What is that?" Xiangjin asked, watching her mix the contents of the bottle. "It's a reagent I used in one of my experiments. If I can mix it with something explosive, we can use this to distract the men chasing us," Ji Yan replied, her expression determined. They worked quickly, joining forces to create an improvised mixture. The tension mounted, and the sound of voices grew closer, making every second precious. "This should work. Now we need to get ready," Ji Yan said, holding the mixture firmly. "When they come in, we'll throw this and head out the front door." Xiangjin nodded, his mind focused on the plan. "Let's hide and wait." They found a dark corner where they crouched, waiting for the intruders to arrive. Time seemed to drag on, and Xiangjin's heart pulsed in his chest. He felt the pressure of the moment, but there was no room for fear. The only thing that mattered was protecting Ji Yan. Finally, the basement door creaked open, and the shadows of the men invaded the space. The voices were clear now, and Xiangjin felt anger boil inside him upon hearing the disdainful comments about Ji Yan. "She can't have gone far. The formula is worth a lot, and we will find her," said one of the men in a gruff voice. "You will pay for this, Xiangjin. When I get the formula, it will be the end for both of you." The voice was filled with venom and rage, and Seongjin knew he couldn't hesitate. Now, he whispered to Ji-yeon, who already had the mixture ready in her hands. She threw the vial towards the men, and the impact was immediate. The mixture exploded into a cloud of colorful smoke, obscuring the environment and confusing the intruders. The men began to cough and move around disoriented. "Let's go!" Seongjin pulled Ji-yeon, and they ran toward the main exit of the basement. The chaos enveloped them like armor as they headed for the light shining at the door. But the men were not ready to give up. Seongjin felt a hand grab his arm, and he quickly turned, striking the toolbox against the man, who fell to the ground with a scream. "Go, Ji-yeon!" he shouted as he turned to face the others. The panic in his eyes was a flame igniting his determination. They needed a plan, but they couldn't afford to waste time. Ji-yeon, seeing what was happening, shouted, "Seongjin, we need to get out now." "I'll be right behind you," he replied, dodging another attack, adrenaline guiding him. She did what she could to help him, throwing one of the vials she had found, creating more smoke and distracting the men. With that, Seongjin was able to move more quickly, finally reaching Ji-yeon, who was waiting for him near the exit. The two ran outside, where the daylight hit them like a blessing. But freedom was temporary, and the sound of tires screeching in the distance alerted them that the chase was not over. "Let's go to the park," Ji-yeon suggested, pointing to a path toward a place she knew well. The two ran, their legs burning from the effort. When they reached the park, the scene seemed calm, but tension still hung in the air. They hid behind a large oak tree, trying to recover and assess the situation. "We need to find help," Seongjin said, looking around. The park was full of people, but everyone seemed oblivious to the threat approaching. "I have a friend who can help us. He's a journalist and can expose all of this," Ji-yeon said, her voice a mix of hope and urgency. "Where is he?" Seongjin asked, scanning the park for an exit. "He should be at the cafe near the park entrance. We can get there disguised and explain the situation," she replied. With a plan in mind, the two began to move. They blended into the crowd, trying not to draw attention. Seongjin's heart was still racing, but now there was a new hope pulsing within him. As they approached the cafe, Ji-yeon held his hand, her expression a mix of determination and fear. "We can't let what happened here be in vain. This is bigger than us. We need to stop these men before they do any more harm." "I'm with you, Ji-yeon. Let's put an end to this," Seongjin replied, his gaze fixed on a future that still seemed uncertain but full of possibilities. The cafe door opened, and the two entered, ready to face the next challenge, knowing that the fight for the truth had only just begun. The past still haunted them, but the determination to change the future now guided them. The battle for truth would be long, but together they were stronger. The light of truth guided them, and despite their fear, a new chapter was about to be written in their lives. They were not just survivors. They were warriors in search of justice and freedom. The months that followed that intense struggle in the lab radically changed Seongjin and Ji-yeon's lives. With the help of the journalist friend, they managed to expose the corporation's illegal operations and bring to light the truths that had remained hidden for so long. Those responsible were prosecuted, and justice finally began to do its work. However, The price of victory was high. The weight of the decisions they made haunted them, and the world they knew would never be the same again. But amidst the pain and struggle, hope also blossomed. The search for truth brought them even closer together, and together they learned to rebuild their lives, one step at a time. On a sunny morning, Xiangjin and Jiyon decided to meet with the survivors of the experiments, now freed and trying to find a new path. They organized an event in the park where it all had begun, a place that now symbolized freedom and new life. Jiyon looked at the gathered crowd and said, "It's important that we all come together. What happened to us cannot be forgotten. We need to support each other and fight for a better future." Xiangjin stood beside her, observing the expressions of hope and determination on the faces of their new friends. The energy was contagious, and he felt the excitement pulsing within him. "Together we are stronger," Xiangjin asserted, taking Jiyon's hand in a gesture of support. "We can make a difference and ensure that this never happens again." The event unfolded with presentations and emotional testimonies. The stories of overcoming and resilience were the fuel that kept the flame of hope alive. People shared their experiences, their fears, and their victories, and the solidarity among them grew stronger with each account. After the event, as the sun set, Xiangjin and Jiyon walked through the park, now full of life and energy. The gentle breeze caressed their faces, and the smell of freshly cut grass filled the air. It was a reminder of how much things could change and the power of resilience. "Look how different everything is now," Jiyon said, smiling as she watched children playing in the distance. "This is what we always wanted, right? A world where people can live without fear." "Yes, and we were a part of it. It was hard, but we made it," Xiangjin replied, feeling the depth of her words. "I just hope we can keep fighting," Jiyon said, her voice heavy with emotion. "Not just for us, but for all those who are still struggling." Xiangjin stopped and looked into her eyes, determination shining like never before. "We will. We won't give up as long as there is injustice in this world." And with those words, they made a silent pact. The life that lay ahead would be filled with challenges, but together they were ready to face them. The fight for truth would not end, and every step forward was a step toward a brighter future. As they left the park, Xiangjin and Jiyon looked toward the horizon, where the sun was bidding farewell and the moon was beginning to rise. It was a new beginning, a new opportunity to make a difference. The shadows of the past would not completely disappear, but the light of truth and justice now illuminated their path. And so, armed with courage and determination, they were ready to write the next chapter of their lives. What could have been the end was, in fact, the beginning of an even more meaningful journey. The struggle for justice, for truth, and for freedom would always continue. But now, with lighter hearts and the hope of a better world, together, Xiangjin and Jiyon became not just survivors, but advocates for justice. And their story, which began amid chaos and pain, was now transforming into a narrative of overcoming, love, and hope. They knew that the road ahead would be long, but it was also filled with promise. "We are ready for any challenge," Xiangjin said, holding Jiyon's hand. "The fight goes on." And so, with smiles on their faces and a spark of determination in their eyes, they moved forward, ready to face whatever the future held for them. After the transformative events in the park, Seongjin and Ji-yeon returned home, where daily life began to resume its normal course. However, they could not forget the voices that still cried out for justice. The struggle they had fought had united them indissolubly, and each day the responsibility of continuing to make a difference weighed on their hearts. Nevertheless, the scars of the past were still deep. One night, while Seongjin was in his studio, he decided to review some of his notes. The cases of abuse and exploitation that had been revealed in the corporation stayed with him. He began working on a documentary, deciding that the best way to honor the struggle of the survivors was to give them a platform to tell their stories. "This is something we need to do," Ji-yeon said, walking into the room and finding Seongjin absorbed in his notes. "Their voices must be heard." "Yes, I feel that this is important. We cannot let their stories be forgotten," Seongjin replied, looking up and meeting her determined gaze. As days turned into weeks, the documentary began to take shape. They interviewed the survivors, capturing their stories with sensitivity and respect. Each account was a combination of pain and strength, a testament to human resilience. Seongjin and Ji-yeon traveled across the country, bringing along a production team that shared the same passion. With each new recording, the connection between them and the survivors deepened, forming bonds that would transcend the difficulties faced. During one of those recordings, Seongjin met Min Seo, a young woman who had escaped from a traumatic experience. She was shy, but there was a spark of courage in her eyes. As she shared her story, Min Seo revealed the pains she carried, but also the hope she found in coming together with other survivors. "It's incredible to know we're not alone," Min Seo said, emotional. "I never thought I would have the courage to talk about this, but now I feel like I have a voice." Seongjin looked at her with admiration. "Your story is important, Min Seo. This is how we can make a difference." The recordings became not just a project, but a movement. The documentary quickly attracted national attention, sparking interest from activists and organizations fighting for social change. The stories of Seongjin and Ji-yeon began to inspire others, and soon the community of survivors grew. One day, while at a human rights conference, Seongjin and Ji-yeon encountered a group of young activists organizing a protest in defense of survivors' rights. The atmosphere was electric, and their determination was palpable. "We are the new generation of justice advocates," shouted a young woman named Hae-jin, climbing onto the makeshift stage. "We won't stop until every voice is heard." Ji-yeon turned to Seongjin, her heart racing. "This is what we need. More voices, more people united." Together, they joined the young activists, and like a wave of hope, they began mobilizing the community. The protest became a powerful demonstration filled with passion and determination. The streets were crowded with people holding signs, shouting slogans for justice and equality. Seongjin and Ji-yeon, now prominent figures in the fight, stood before the crowd, ready to share their own stories and inspire others. From then on, the struggle was not just theirs, but of all those who felt inspired to stand up and fight. The documentary was launched to great success, and the stories of courage and resilience reached hearts across the country. It became a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the midst of darkness, the light of truth and solidarity could shine brightly. Months after the documentary's release, Seong-jin and Ji-yeon were invited to a prestigious television program where they could discuss the importance of fighting for survivors' rights. In the studio, the spotlight illuminated their faces, and the energy was electrically charged. It was an opportunity to share their messages with an even larger audience. As they sat in the chair before the host, Seong-jin felt a mix of nervousness and excitement. This is an incredible platform, and we need to use it to make a difference, he whispered to Ji-yeon, who smiled, full of encouragement. The show began, and the conversation flowed among the guests. Seong-jin and Ji-yeon shared their experiences and the impact of the documentary. The stories they told were captivating, and the audience sat in silence, listening attentively. However, during the broadcast, a new challenge arose. An executive from the corporation responsible for the experiences was called to speak, attempting to discredit the work they had done. He tried to minimize the claims and silence the voices of the survivors. Seong-jin felt anger rising within him, but at the same time, he knew he needed to keep his composure. Ji-yeon, at his side, took his hand, a silent signal that they were in this battle together. With all due respect, we are not here to attack your corporation, Seong-jin said in response to the executive. We are here to give voice to those who have been silenced. Each of the survivors has the right to be heard and to seek justice. This fight will not stop. The audience erupted in applause, and the host, visibly moved, asked Seong-jin and Ji-yeon to share their hopes for the future. The future is the change we are seeking, Ji-yeon stated, her voice filled with emotion. We believe that together we can create a better world where people are treated with dignity and respect. At the end of the program, social media was ablaze, and their message spread like wildfire. The voices of the survivors echoed even louder, and the fight for justice gained momentum. A year later, Seong-jin and Ji-yeon were at an awards event, where they received an award for their efforts in promoting human rights. As they stepped onto the stage, the crowd applauded them standing, and the emotion was intense. Ji-yeon said with tears in her eyes, "This award is not just ours. It is a tribute to all the survivors and to everyone who fights for justice. The struggle continues, and together we can make a difference." In that moment, Seong-jin and Ji-yeon realized they had created a movement. They were no longer just survivors, but leaders and advocates for the truth. The fight they had started together was now spreading, with every voice joining the cause. And so, as the light shone down on them and the applause echoed, Seong-jin and Ji-yeon knew that, no matter the challenges they would face, their journey for truth, justice, and freedom would continue, inspiring others to rise up and fight as well. Their story was far from an end. It was just the beginning of a legacy that would never be forgotten.